A very good evening and welcome to the India Development Debate. I'm Tamanna Inamdar, and it is just days now from when lockdown 2.0 is set to end, May 3rd. The signal is pretty clear that there will be some kind of easing now in the restrictions that we've seen, the very severe and strict lockdown that we've seen in India so far. Migrants have been allowed to move, stranded students, pilgrims have been allowed to move, albeit with conditions. The Ministry of Home Affairs has also said that they will put out guidelines which will ease things up from May 4th, hopefully. The problem is no one knows exactly what will ease up, how, and how they should prepare for it. We're talking, of course, about the big campaign that we have consistently been working on here on the show and across the Times network, which is the India Revival Mission. It is imperative, it is necessary, and it is unavoidable to now focus on how India can move ahead. An extended economic lockdown could be hurting us even more than a possible jump in COVID cases. The bright side is that our numbers are pretty decent in terms of those who have been impacted by COVID-19. We seem to have handled the medical side of it pretty well. So can we now dare to move forward, and how should we do this? We've been speaking to top industry leaders consistently over the last few days. And today I'm very glad to introduce on the panel, Ms. Kiran Mazumdar, the Chairperson and Managing Director, of course, of Biocon. Siddhartha Sanyal joins us. He's the Chief Economist of Bandhan Bank. And Mrs. Archana Garodia Gupta, who is, of course, handling the MSME segment for FICCI as well. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for speaking with us. Ms. Shaw, let me begin by getting your take on the basic premise of what we've set out over here. How important is it to now open up? And largely everyone we speak to agrees, yes, we should open up, yes, we should open up. But how soon and how bold should we be with this step?
Let me start by saying that I think these last 5 weeks, at least when we finish on the 3rd of May, will be 5 weeks, have been very well spent. I think we have done very well understanding the risk, managing the risk, and mitigating the risk in many, many ways, because this lockdown helped us really stop the spread in a way that it would have been very difficult for us to manage if we hadn't done it. I think 2 weeks delay or extension will really not put us in a much better place, because I think we must understand that when we lift the lockdown, there is going to be a surge of positive cases, especially when we are going to get people back into economic activity. And I keep emphasizing the fact that we should not really focus on the positive cases and be so concerned about, sudden surge in positive cases overnight of X number and Y number, because what we really ought to be tracking is the severity of the disease and the fatality of the disease, because that is what will overwhelm our healthcare system. India is in a very good place because the number of deaths have crossed 1,000. But if you put that in context, it's still at around just about 3% in terms of mortality rate, in terms of the positive cases that have been assessed. Our TPRs, or the test positive rates, are also very low. They are at about 4.4, which means 1 in 23 people test positive. That's a good indication that this is the burden or the load of the disease on our society at the moment. 90% of our population is below the age of 60. What really is very interesting about this viral pandemic is that most of the fatalities and severity, it basically impacts people over the age of 60. So I think we can, with great confidence, allow our young workforce to get back to work. And I think we cannot afford any more economic lockdown, because that is going to put us into a very, very challenging situation. You've got to get people back to work. You've got to get economic activity back. And because we are a young country with young workforce, I really believe that you should allow them to get back to work. And you should not worry if you get a surge in positive cases with the young workforce, because
Yeah.
they're the ones who are going to build the herd immunity for our country.
Yeah, Ms. Shaw, if you look at the South Korea model, for example, and everyone talks about that when they say that we must begin to get back. The good news, of course, everyone, is that our rate of doubling of cases has come down, our recovery rate has come up. So all of these are great indicators. But if we don't have credible testing mechanism, won't that be difficult? And that really is the one part which I wonder whether we are at the right place at the end of lockdown 2.0. You need to be able to make sure that you're not letting asymptomatic carriers out.
First and foremost, you must understand that India is like Europe. You have many, many countries. Each state is like a country, okay? And the burden of disease, the way the disease has been contained or zoned is very different in each part of the country. You have the Karnataka model, you have the Bhilwara model. So each one of these is very interesting for us to look at. Karnataka has managed basically to control this virus very well because they started doing district level management of the disease. And I personally believe this is what everywhere should happen. You should actually start managing this disease at a district level so that you have the district administration testing, tracking. See, these are the things you need to do. Okay. So you are right. You must test more because right now our testing levels are very, very low. Okay. So you must increase your test at a district level. So safeguards and surveillance are going to be absolutely imperative when you lift the lockdown. What do we mean by that? Temperature profiling, of anyone who's getting into a public space or into a workplace. And by surveillance, surveillance means this business of tracking symptomatic people, tracking quarantined asymptomatic people, and sure that the contact tracing is also then tested and quarantined if necessary. Also need to start understanding that even if you get positive cases in the workplace, all you need to do is quarantine, sanitize, and let the work go on. And let people return to work as soon as they are okay. Right now, we are so extreme in the way we are dealing with any positive case in the workplace where we shut down the whole workplace. That should not be the attitude, because we must expect people to test positive when we lift the lockdown, but because it's population, you are not going to see the severe impact of this disease. At the same time, I think the only people who really need to extend the habits and the behavior of the lockdown protocols are the elderly, the people who are vulnerable, the people who are who comorbidities like diabetes or cancer. You can't allow them to be mingling with positive cases. That is what we should be doing.
Okay. Siddhartha, Sanyal, if you could come in with, the kind of data now which we need to back this theory that it's okay to see a small surge in positive cases because the economic cost is just too high. Crystal, for example, sees a 10% fall in revenues and at least 15% erosion for companies in FY21. But if you bring it down to the human level, job losses, pay cuts, those numbers are beginning to mount.
Yes, absolutely, Tamanna. The whole idea of the lockdown was, without getting into too much of technicalities from a health expert, what I would like to say, the whole idea of getting into a lockdown was to buy some time, and it was for the administration and the government and the health system was to put together some kind of a plan of action and some kind of a medical infrastructure which would be put together quickly. I think they have made a decent progress over the course of the last close to about, let's say about 40 odd days. Now they have to take some bit of measured opening up as an approach. The simple fact here is the one of the most critical reasons here in terms of the supply chain management. you don't see any impact if the supply chain is shut down for 7 days. You start seeing some kind of an impact if it goes to 15 days and 20 days. But the impact on of the supply chain shutdown in terms of availability of even the basic necessities become absolutely exponential, possibly beyond something like 20, 25 odd days, because that's typically the inventory at various distribution levels people keep in most of the essential commodities in our country. Now, in terms of coming back very quick, touching upon very quickly the broad macro data, think about what can happen this particular lockdown. At this moment, most forecasts are ranging somewhere in the range of 0 to 2% kind of a GDP growth in case of India for the full financial year. Now, if you break it down further into various quarters, the first quarter is possibly already seen as a significantly negative GDP growth or a contraction in GDP, which is absolutely unusual in the Indian context. Now, we are talking about maybe a 6% kind of a year-on-year contraction in the overall country's overall GDP for the first quarter, when we are taking for about a month. Think about the impact
Sanyal,
of the quarterly GDP and the overall GDP.
I'm going to have to fix your connection. Let me go to Archana ji. You know, we spoke, ma'am, if you remember, towards the beginning of this lockdown. And you talked about how for MSMEs, the big fear was about how they would last. Now we have some perspective so many days later. Anecdotally, we hear about how several have not figured out if they can even survive in the next couple of months. We hear about pay cuts and salary cuts in big corporate companies. Of course, listed companies talk about it. What has been happening on this end between small and medium and micro enterprises?
I mean, obviously, the problem is far more severe because access to financial resources for the MSMEs is much more limited than it is for larger corporates. So, of course, many units, most units have been shut down for the last 40 days because they are not part of the essential group of products. Now, many have been paying their workers, many have been giving pay cuts, and many have not been paying their workers because they don't have the money. In any case, MSMEs have very restricted financial flexibility. So for me, the most important thing that the government now needs to do is to ensure the survival of these units. We can look at their viability at a later date, but the first thing that needs to be done is to get all of them have bank loans. All of them have bank relationships. It's important that the banks with which they have relationship extend some additional credit to them. One of the things we've suggested is that 25% of their credit limit should be given by the banks as a COVID loan, which could have a moratorium of maybe 6 months to a year, after which it could be repaid. Now, of course, that will still have an interest burden on them, but we need to look at this because this is crucial. Most MSMEs have already run out of funds. And once the lockdown starts lifting, they will need that money for, working capital requirements. So it's really urgent that the banks, the directives which have been given to them for 3 months, all of those are adhered to, because it's all been left as a guidance, but not as a directive. So most of the banks are really, they're holding back. They're not extending the credit that is required to them.
The lack of credit in the system, despite huge liquidity, is a common refrain we hear. That hesitation seems to be continuing. Mr. Sanyal, what can be done about this? What can be done about this as we try and look at the next phase? We talk about the India Revival Mission, surviving and thriving. Do you think the government needs to step in? Why are banks so hesitant?
So if you see the way liquidity was infused earlier, a few quarters back, it was general liquidity infusion. Now, even the policymakers are moving towards a more targeted form of liquidity infusion. For example, recently there had been institutionalization of a framework where liquidity is meant for NBFCs in particular. I think at this juncture, there has to be a few more targeted liquidity infusion mechanisms. Some of them must address the needs for example, the lower end of the socio-economic strata. For some of them must ensure the needs for the MSME sector in particular, which is a very pertinent point. Some may actually go to target towards the affordable housing segment. And my sense is that a lot of these things will be coming over the course of the next few months. In addition to the RBI's bias towards cutting the rates, over a period of time, this is bound to show some good results. But at this juncture, you must understand that there has been a lot of apprehension about the general state of the economy as well as for the smaller business units. I think it will take some time, but as we get to see more and more targeted liquidity infusion with a generally low interest rate regime, this will likely to take off. And in this particular context, it's very important to see that the government might have to think about some kind of a guarantee mechanism so far as the working capital needs for MSMEs, etc., are concerned. So in that case, if the bank is lending money to an MSME, if it is backed by some kind of a guarantee mechanism on the part of the government on RBI, it becomes many times more easier for the bank to extend the loan, and it will serve the purpose of the liquidity infusion mechanism also.
You know, it's also about actual implementation. Earlier today, for example, the Ministry of Home Affairs has clarified to states, and it's a statement that they've put out, saying that free movement of trucks, goods carriers, including empty trucks, should be ensured. Local authorities must not insist on separate passes at interstate borders. This is essential to maintain supply chains of goods and services. The time lag is the concern. Ms. Shaw, let me come to you on this. The guidelines say something, then they are interpreted, reinterpreted, clarified. State governments, have their own point of view. District administrations have their own point of view. And then the person on ground representing authority, the police officer working very hard, but then uses his own discretion. And that is a recurring theme we've seen.
Tamanna, you're right. I think all the instructions are lost in translation, and you're basically getting, people not really carrying out the protocols and what you are actually directing people to do. In fact, we've even seen in our own case where samples were supposed to be transported from one state to another, and they're not even being allowed to go and collect them, and so on and so forth. So I think there needs to be a much better, coordination effort in making sure that any guidelines or directives are very well rolled out across the country. I think that's where the problem is. Even at a state level, I think the administration has to make sure that it gets to every official who is involved in COVID management. So I think this is a management problem. It's an administration problem. It's not with the guidelines and the overall objectives. So that's what I think is really the problem today.
It's the very interesting conundrum, Mr. Sanyal, is are we waiting for a package, or do we need to let economic activity start again, and that will be in the short and immediate term better than waiting for any big package to be announced and then trickle down to whoever needs it the most. It's an argument that was made today by Dr. Rajan as well, where he said that, with the example of India has a lot of mouths to feed, and we can't keep, waiting just for aid to come in and do the job for it. We need to let people go back to work. Which is why this is even more important to restart the economy from that perspective?
Yes, absolutely. It's important. So there are two basic premises of economics: demand and supply. So this will take care of both. That this, as people's income gets generated, as people's income gets supported over a period of time, and as it gives them confidence that my earning potential, which was for a brief period of time was not there, is coming back. That will give a clear boost to demand and at the especially at the grassroots level or at the bottom end of the socio-economic pyramid, which is extremely important because all of us do understand that even if a meaningful government package is announced, as it gets translated and percolated down the line, a lot of them get leaked. So we all see the importance of people's ability to boost their own income to come back, and that will support the demand side. And at the same time, this particular thing, as activity will be coming back both in the manufacturing side, I do understand in certain segments of services we might have to remain a bit more cautious. But at least in the manufacturing side and in the permissible segment of services, as we allow people or allow organizations to start functioning and come closer to a normal kind of functioning, that will boost the supply potential of the economy, and that will keep a lot of imbalances in check. I think that's why it's very, very important. But at the same time, I'm not denying that you have to balance the priorities of the health-related issues and will not really think only about the economic issues at this juncture.
Okay, and now how do you draw the balance? Health-related issues, of course, are very important. And, as Kiran has been saying, that we have a younger population, better numbers coming in. So we will be focusing on that. I just want to come back to you, Ms. Shaw, on, the wait right now for a vaccine or for medication that will help ease this stress. I know Biocon itself has been trying to repurpose some drugs to work for COVID. Right now, though, with all of these varied theories, it seems like a shot in the dark. How close, in your view, medically, are we to some kind of at least a temporary solution where we feel, okay, that's safe for us to get out of our houses and start working?
So obviously, the safest is when the vaccine arrives, and everyone's asking how soon can the vaccine arrive. Let me tell you that there are almost 90 vaccine programs around the world. But of that, about 6 or 7 have already entered the clinic, which is good news. China has about 3 vaccine programs already advancing in the clinic. Germany has 1 program. I think UK through an Oxford University research group has 1 product in the clinic. And you have 2 others from the US also advancing has just entered the clinic. So I think if you look at all these vaccines which are being developed, the hope is that at least a few of these will start showing very, very good data by September, October onwards. Now, unfortunately, from a regulatory point of view, you have to go through certain phases of clinical trials. So the first phase is really the safety trial, where you actually inoculate a number of healthy volunteers. And once you do that, you start looking at how they tolerate the vaccine, how they basically, shown an antibody response to the vaccine. Then you do a efficacy trial where you start measuring the amount of antibody response, the endurance of the antibody response. And what you really do in a phase 3 trial is then to, sort of immunize a much larger, diverse population of all ages. And then you start seeing what the immunization effect is of that vaccine. Now, the reason it lasts for a long time is because you have to see over a 1 year, how long is that enduring? How long is that response enduring? Go through that phase to see over a year what is happening. So what we expect is that before the end of the year, if you're starting to see a good immune response from people for the vaccine, they're likely to give a conditional approval through what is called as emergency use. That means you will be able to use that vaccine for, say, for instance, people are trying to use it for healthcare workers treating COVID patients first. Then you will try and give it to people who are most vulnerable and things like that. So that by the time they get their final approval, they know that this vaccine is here and you can immunize the whole world. So I don't think there will be just one vaccine. I think you will have several vaccines that will be approved.
Yes.
Actually would give us a much better opportunity to immunize a larger population even before the year end. Give us some comfort. In the meantime, I think we also need to look at potential therapies or drugs that can actually also save lives. That's really the big concern is. So whether it is plasma therapy, which is being experimented right now, whether it is new drugs, we are also repurposing certain antibodies to see whether an antibody to see whether it can do things like, reduce the cytokine release that happens and causes sepsis, or whether it's an anti-inflammatory antibody. So can it reduce the inflammation in the lungs, which is also a big problem today? Many drugs are being tried. And hopefully some of these drugs will actually do a good job. And if that is the case, then we at least won't lose lives. Infections are one thing, but not losing lives is what really scares everyone.
Yeah.
And
No, that's the thing about the numbers. People say that the numbers are less, but even if those numbers are minuscule, you don't want yourself, your loved one, someone you know to be part of it. It's not like people will get less scared because of mortality.
I agree, Tamanna, but let's look at the numbers of people we lose to cancer. Let's look at the number of people we used to lose to dengue, to TB, to all these things. Right now, there's such a scare because you really don't know whether you live or die. Okay. At least the other cases, okay, some of them are very fatal and, they, like cancer. You just saw two unfortunate, sad deaths of our two big stars, yesterday and today, and they both succumbed to cancer because that they knew was like a death sentence for them. They were told that you will not have more than a couple of years at best. So, here what happens is you really don't know whether you're a lucky person who can survive or whether you will absolutely succumb to this in such a nasty way. We've never seen such a pandemic and we've never seen people die in such large numbers together. And what really scared us was what happened in Italy, Spain, and New York. I think in India, the numbers are still manageable and we should still try and see how many lives we can save.
No, absolutely. Saving lives is the priority, but how can we do that by saving lives on all levels?
Yes, and we should not be
also in danger. Let me get Archana ji.
Yes, and we shouldn't be losing lives because of loss of livelihoods.
Yes, loss of livelihood, starvation, hunger, loss of economic activity has huge amount of repercussions. Archana ji, what is the concern right now? Biggest concern with restarting? If there is now clearer guidelines which will help industry begin. Suppose services, small shops, etc., are allowed to open in green zones with social distancing norms. Are they ready to start business? What are the issues really with labor or with supply chains? Have those been ironed out in preparation?
See, it's you have very many sectors, different sectors in MSMEs. So some sectors will, or in business, some sectors will recover faster, say pharmaceuticals, or food or essential items which people will need. Those sectors will come back faster. But certain sectors like textiles, say like gems and jewelry, or hospitality and tourism, of course, these are going to take a very long time to recover. The export-oriented sectors, because we're going to see a recession worldwide. Now, for the sectors which will recover fast, maybe the government just needs to give a little bit of help. But for the longer, for example, what are you going to do with the millions of people who work in the hospitality or the tourism industry? That's not going to recover very fast. So you're going to see a kind of a restructuring of the economy over the next year. And you need to, of course, if some sector is going out of fashion or it's going to go down, you cannot keep supporting it. It has to have a long-term future. What government government will have to work very hard at providing alternative ways of employment. Some will come in the industries which are doing well, but there will be a large number of people who will have no jobs even after the recovery starts. So one thing which, a lot of industries, I think, want to exit China, but they're looking for viable alternatives. Unfortunately, whatever we hear of the industries which are exiting, they tend to go to Vietnam or other countries, not come so much to China. I think while the government realizes the need for it, they need to announce some very good policies to attract businesses to relocate to India, because we are going to need new sources of employment and very soon. And this opportunity is going to be, this maybe a few months. We have that window in which we to create those kind of things, and a lot of MSMEs and of course businesses would be there, downstream ancillaries from those. So whatever tax breaks, land, the standard, how do you attract foreign investment, I think they need to put it out in a very big way, because this is a sort of a window which has been created for us.
Absolutely. Just yes, Mr. Sanyal, I was just coming to you.
If I just add to what Archana ji just mentioned, a very interesting point is that from an economic management point of view, we are constantly dealing with two areas. One, a very top-down approach, where we are talking about as a nation, how can we add to our competitive advantage in terms of getting some business from China or some of the other places attract to India. The other thing is very different, which is extremely bottom-up, that how we can support the bottom end of our socio-economic pyramid at this juncture, which is not having a regular stream of income in certain cases, or more importantly, no social security net, etc. Now, one very interesting thing here is that a lot of the small businesses, their fate changes dramatically when the lockdown gets lifted. They are absolutely deprived many a times. They are very, there is a lot of challenges for them in terms of getting funds or getting lines of credit when their business is not functioning. But at the same time, as soon as the lockdown gets lifted, see the dramatic change in their fortune. The thing is, a lot of these small entrepreneurs do supply just basic necessities of life, number one. So even if the economic fortune of the country is not bright, people will go and spend money on that. Number two, a lot of them are very local in their operation. They don't depend on a very complicated and long supply chain. So as soon as the lockdown gets lifted, they will quickly bounce back into some kind of normalcy. And this is, I'm talking about the absolute bottom end of the socio-economic pyramid. As we continue to get the lockdown extended, while this might be needed from a purely health management point of view, but at the same time, the difficulties for this particular segment might actually get very severe. So at this juncture, if I just add to that is why if I add to what Archana ji just mentioned, it makes a lot of sense to think about exploring where we can actually nudge people to go back to some kind of normalcy in terms of their activity. At no point of time I'm trying to say that we can ignore the basic cautious guidelines around health management and pandemic management areas.
No, absolutely. There's no question of that. And that's not what anyone is suggesting at all. But I think no one can ignore the fact that we need to revive. The India Revival Mission is important. It does not end. Even if some guidelines are eased up post May 4th, we're still waiting to hear on that, because this is going to be a long, painstaking effort in various sectors for companies, for businesses, for individuals to revive themselves and come to terms with this new post-COVID world. I want to thank all of you for joining us on the show this evening. We'll take a very short break over here, but on the other side, what a devastating couple of days it has been. We've lost two veterans of the movie business, Irfan Khan yesterday, Rishi Kapoor today, both to cancer. We come back with voices telling us about how these veteran actors were as people and remembering them fondly. Don't go away.